welcome everybody. I very much appreciate your all attendance here for this particular HAB and FAB meeting that will kick off our federal consistency review for the New England Wind project. As you know, this is a necessary piece of information that the CRMC needs to begin its federal consistency review process, this kickoff meeting, if you will, with the HAB and the FAB. We have put out notifications to both of these advisory groups. And while it's a difficult time of the year to organize a meeting at this time for commercial fishery interest or just general vacations, we do need to move forward with the project. So we have tried to organize this meeting in a timely fashion from our 30-day letter, and knowing that we'd be up against some of the summer schedules. So if you notice that there's not as many folks on as you might expect, it's generally because of that. It's because of mostly schedules, but everybody knows about it. The two advisory groups know about it, that we're moving forward, which is one of the reasons why we're recording it, which we would normally anyway. And Megan, as we have spoken earlier, you will be making your slide presentation tonight available so that we can share it to those members that did not and could not attend to move forward. But again, so thank you all very much. This is the overview of the project that Megan will be presenting on behalf of her project team. So Megan, if you can go into as much detail as possible with the location, the proposed project details, any impacts or resolves that you see, any fishery issues, any habitat issues as you're making presentations, and ask that, if you don't mind, ask that if we all have questions to raise our hands during the presentation and we can ask them. We find that these presentations, while yes, formal to kick off the actual review period, are better when they're interactive and can have a lot of give and take back and forth, because in my opinion, that's when a lot of it, more information comes out to answer specific questions rather than waiting to the end or follow-up emails the next day or two. So that said, unless my team wants to add any more, I'll ask you, Megan, to take over here, share the screen, and give us your presentation.
Sure. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff, and the rest of the attendees on this FAB and HAB call. And I will be leading the presentation, but the entire, or I shouldn't say the entire, the large majority of the New England Wind team members will be also co-presenting with me. And to underscore what Jeff just said, we definitely want this to be a conversation. So if anybody does have questions, please, we encourage you to ask in real time so that we can address any questions or concerns that you may have. So that being said, I will kick off our slides, which will talk about the New England Wind project, some of the activities that have occurred to date, and solicit feedback from those of you on the phone, and certainly we'll make this presentation available to whomever is interested and was unable to join this evening's presentation. First off, here's the agenda. We'll do team introductions, talk about the project and the project components, how the project is divided into phases, some of the project components such as the offshore cable corridors and the various options that the team and the engineering team is considering, and specific to this meeting, information that is relevant to CRMC's enforceable policies included in the ocean SAMP, namely the GLD, which the project is included within that area. And lastly, we certainly want to make time for discussion and questions, but again, please ask throughout the presentation. So just at a high level, our team works for Avangrid, which is part of the global Iberdrola team. And our team has the benefit of conversing with our global team members who are transferring their knowledge of projects literally across the globe here to our US portfolio of projects. Avangrid is based in the United States. Our US office for offshore wind is headquartered in Boston. So that's where the majority of us sit. We also have field offices in New Bedford and Bridgeport, where some of the more local folks are based. We are the third largest wind operator in the United States. Our onshore wind and solar projects are comprised of 8 gigawatts in operation, and our total offshore wind capacity is just over 5 gigawatts. So that includes the projects included within New England Wind, as well as Vineyard Wind 1, which I know all of you are familiar with, and it's currently under construction, as well as the Kitty Hawk offshore wind project, which is off the coast of Virginia and North Carolina. So on this call, I'd like to highlight some of the New England Wind team members, and you can see here myself, I'm part of the development team. You will also be hearing from Christina Hoffman, who is a director in the development project management for the New England Wind projects, Stephanie Wilson, who's the director of offshore wind permitting, Jerry Edens, whom you all know, who is our legal counsel for the project, John Harker, who is the lead for fisheries outreach. He's our fisheries liaison officer, Kayla Howard, who has been working on this project, as well as the Vineyard Wind project as our fisheries liaison, Joe Zitelli, who's our project environmental lead and will be taking the lead on the fisheries mitigation plan, Steve Tedros, he is very active in Rhode Island as our outreach coordinator along Rhode Island as well as the south coast of Massachusetts, and lastly, Caitlin Hammer, who is part of the team as a member of Epsilon environmental consulting team. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. At this point, I will hand it off to Christina Hoffman.
Great. Thanks, Megan, and good evening, everybody. Nice to be here with you. I'm going to walk through the next few slides that give an overview of the proposed development. I think the last time that we gave a project introduction several months ago, it had been a couple of years prior to that, so a lot has happened over those couple of years, not the least of which was this project used to be called Vineyard Wind South. We changed the name last year to New England Wind, and that reflects the development of our projects within lease area OCSA 0534. And also these projects that are contained within New England Wind, we'll go into a little more detail about that, are wholly owned by Avangrid, a subsidiary of Avangrid Renewables LLC, which is also a change in ownership because they were formerly owned 50% by Avangrid and 50% by Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners as part of the joint venture of Vineyard Wind. But that was restructured over the last year or so. And so these projects are now wholly owned by Avangrid Renewables. So New England Wind includes the offshore renewable wind energy facilities in the lease area 0534. It was formerly part of one big long lease area that included what's shown on the map now as 0501. The entire lease area used to be known as 0501, and in the last year, basically after the Vineyard Wind 1 project completed all of its project reviews and had all of its permits in hand, the lease was segregated officially by BOEM into 2 separate lease areas. So the Vineyard Wind 1 project progresses on in the 0501 lease area, and the New England Wind is encompassing the remainder, which is now called 0534. So the New England Wind includes not just the offshore development pieces that are in the wind area, wind energy areas, but also the offshore export cables, the landings onto shore, the duck bank routes, as well as the onshore substations. The lease area has been effectively divided into 2 phases. Basically, the development has been divided into 2 phases, and there's a phase 1 and a phase 2. And we have on the next slide, we'll show you what that looks like. But that's how it's been described in the COP. And the COP is the construction and operations plan that really describes the project in great detail and was submitted to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management back in 2020. And so we refer to it sometimes throughout presentations because it has so much detail regarding the project in it. So as we've outlined the project New England Wind as phase 1 and phase 2, it really encompasses, New England Wind encompasses the entire lease area. Right now, the proposal is to include 4 or 5 offshore export cables that would extend from lease area 0534 to shore. And currently the base case of what's proposed is to land our cables and connect into the ISO New England grid in the town of Barnstable. We have a variant that has an alternative to land on the south coast of Massachusetts that we'll talk about a little bit later. But our base case is to land all of New England Wind in Barnstable. And the facilities are both in federal waters as well as Massachusetts state waters. So there are no project components that are located within Rhode Island state waters. So if we don't have any questions, we can go to the next slide. Oh, there is a question. David.
Yeah, no, just for the video, could you just say if your export cables are going to be AC or DC?
Sure, they are going to be AC.
Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. So a little more detail about phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 includes a project area or a project that's called Park City Wind. It's a project that is intended to sell the power to Connecticut. And that project was awarded back in 2019, and it's an 804 megawatt project. It is intended to be constructed in the northern portion of lease area 534 within the phase 1 boundaries that are shown in the figure on the right. Phase 1 is in purple. And just for reference, the area in blue that's not labeled along the top of this lease area is the Vineyard Wind 1 project that is currently under construction. The phase 1 of New England Wind would include 41 to 62 wind turbine generators and 1 or 2 electrical service platforms, basically the offshore substations. Phase 2 includes Commonwealth Wind, which was recently awarded to Avangrid Renewables last year in December. It includes over 1,200 megawatts in power, some with the utilities and some anticipated to be with local municipal lighting plants. It's intended to be developed in the southern portion of lease area 534, and it includes 64 to 88 wind turbine and ESP positions, and of that, up to 3 positions would be occupied by the electrical service platforms and therefore not wind turbine generators. So our construction and operations plan that goes into great detail, it really analyzes the maximum impacts for each phase. As we continue to refine the design, we will ultimately land on a boundary between phase 1 and phase 2, but to address the potential impacts from either phase, we have conservatively evaluated the impacts, the largest footprint of each phase of the project. Going to pause there to see if anybody has any questions.
I do.
David, sure.
Just also to fill in the video, if you do your numbers here earlier, you said you have a maximum of 130 locations, but if you take the maximum possible for each project that you have listed here, it's 150. So it could be 105 to 150 possible based on your 2 numbers here. I just wondered if you could explain for the record there in the video that how the maximum numbers fit in with the 130.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a great question. And thanks for bringing it up. So the final configuration of phases 1 and 2 will only include a maximum development of 130 positions. So we would not have a scenario where there were, for instance, 62 positions developed in phase 1 and 88 positions developed in phase 2. We could have 60 positions in phase 1 and 70 positions in phase 2, which would total 130, but we would never have the maximum number of positions developed for each phase as has been evaluated. So we evaluate the largest impact in terms of footprint, but the actual impacts would be smaller by phase, depending on the final number of positions needed in each phase. Or I guess it would be smaller overall. So it would not exceed 130 positions that would be developed. Okay. So a little bit about the offshore export cable corridor. As described earlier, we have an offshore export cable. It's identified in blue on the figure on the screen to the right. It extends roughly in the northern direction from the lease area. It actually crosses through the lease area 0501 and ultimately lands in Barnstable, both phases of the project. And that would include 4 or 5 cables in that, we call it the OECC, Offshore Export Cable Corridor. And this is the similar corridor. This corridor basically is providing co-location of utilities because there is Vineyard Wind 1 cables follow this same corridor, and they would be located to the farthest eastern portion of the corridor. And then the New England Wind cables are anticipated to be installed to the west of the Vineyard Wind 1 cables, but roughly within that same corridor. And that is our base case with the assumption of landing in Barnstable. However, we have included 2 variants that are evaluated. And the first one is called the Western Muskeget variant. And that is added there. You can probably see the blue line makes a fairly sharp corner. Yep, thanks, Megan. And so, you know, for that reason and other potential engineering glitches that we might bump into, we have identified the Western Muskeget variant. And we've identified the use of that variant for that short little section, just the gray section that's highlighted, for up to 2 of the cables coming out of New England Wind. So if needed, we would, you know, run 3 cables through the blue corridor and 2 cables through the Western Muskeget variant, or even 1 cable, I would say up to 2. So we have evaluated that variant as part of our proposed project. And then similarly, we have another more comprehensive variant. It's called the South Coast variant, meaning the South Coast of Massachusetts. We have identified this in the event that we run into issues, whatever those issues might be, getting the full capacity of New England Wind into Barnstable. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the grid and the electric grid, and the capacity of different areas to receive renewable energy is sometimes constrained. And so there are a number of reasons that we might end up using the South Coast variant to transfer some of the power from New England Wind offshore area to an onshore area. So, you know, it could be an engineering concern, it could be a roadway, it could be a grid interconnection. There are lots of reasons that we needed to have an alternative, but our base case right now assumes that we're going to Barnstable, and if we run into issues, then we would move to use the South Coast variant. And the South Coast variant would land in the South Coast of Massachusetts. We've highlighted in pink, you know, the landing would occur somewhere in that pink area, and the green areas on land would identify the potential area onshore where we would put our onshore cables and proposed substation and the interconnection into an existing substation. So that's kind of a lot to digest, but I don't see any questions. Oh, there's a question, David.
Sorry, just keep you on your toes. So if you go only in the blue channel and Vineyard Wind 1 is going through there also, that means there'll be 7 possible cables going through there, right?
Correct.
And could you just discuss what the separation between the cables are? And I have also, I have another one after that.
Sure, no problem. So there is a minimum separation distance that is, it's really negotiated in some cases between different entities. So Vineyard Wind 1 will put their cables in, and then New England Wind will put our cables in, and the spacing is defined by really engineering capacity as well as installation procedures and how much room is needed for after one cable is installed, how much room is needed to install the next cable, as well as operations and maintenance. If anything needed to be done on any one of those cables, we would need to be able to get in and access them. And so they can't be super tightly spaced, which would run the risk of possibly, picking up another cable when we're going in to repair, one. So they are going to be reasonably spaced out. And we have identified in our application what that spacing distance is. I actually don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but we're happy to get it to you. But there is going to be a minimum spacing required.
Okay, thanks for that. And also, if you have the South Coast variant, how will that impact the offshore substations? Will you have to have an additional offshore substation at that junction point or anything else?
No, it really won't. Right now we have up to 5 substation locations identified within the wind energy development area. That's of the 130 positions. And so we definitely have sufficient capacity to put the substation not at that juncture, but within the wind development area. So that would be within the gold area that surrounds the 534 New England wind development.
Thank you again.
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, just a quick, high level, the process that we've been following so far in the project. We submitted our construction and operations plan to BOEM in July 2020. In June of last year, BOEM issued their notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement under NEPA. And they also identified the cooperating agencies that would be part of that process as well. In December 2021, the COP was updated to include those variants that we just talked about for the offshore export cable corridors. We submitted some additional information in April that really addressed the South Coast variant. We went out last year and collected the data along that offshore export cable corridor. And once we finished processing it and evaluating it, we submitted an addendum to the COP to BOEM in April. And then ultimately in June, we updated the COP pretty comprehensively with the project design envelope, some minor tweaks here and there that we made from an engineering standpoint, and basically just updated the COP. So in essence, the June 2022 COP, which has been made available on BOEM's website for the public, combined with the April COP addendum, really completes our project applications, because April addresses the South Coast variant only, while June addresses the remainder of the project, basically with the blue corridor going up to Barnstable. So later this year, we're anticipating that BOEM will issue the draft environmental impact statement that will go out for public review. We anticipate the final environmental impact statement to be issued next August, followed by BOEM's conclusion of the environmental review process, documented as a record of decision in September. And we would anticipate, starting construction within a year or two after that.
And I just want to point out for those who are interested in seeing the schedule in more detail, it's on the permitting dashboard, and the hyperlink is here, which will be included in this presentation. So it's a covered project under FAST 41, and each of these dates are accessible on that website, and you can click on them and see some of the information in more detail. Any questions on the schedule before we move on to our fisheries outreach team? Okay. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to John and Kayla to talk about some of the activities that have been undertaken to date within the wind development area.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Christina, and good evening, everybody. I'm John Harker, the lead for the fisheries outreach. I also have Kayla Howard, and the part of the fisheries team, and other members of the outreach and environmental team that will be presenting during this information for your interests. But for this slide, I'll kind of go forward with some of the details that we kind of wanted to bring up. And I really wanted to start off with highlighting, along with a lot of the other developers, Avangrid has really pushed forward and valued and took for action the input that we've received from the communities, and especially the fishing in our development. As you can see in a lot of our layout, we adopted a 1-by-1 nautical mile spacing for our WTGs. And then also with the orientation to make things more advantageous and for safety concerns, we oriented the WTGs to a north-south and east-west grid pattern, consistent with, which I applaud a lot of the other developers as well, consistent with our surrounding lease area design. So that cooperative effort, in a lot of ways, is one of the systemic things for minimizing the impacts and remaining and keeping those lanes in those areas remained open for fishing activities and for vessel traffic. I'd also like to kind of point out some of the key ingredients to a lot of these efforts that we've had going forward are not only found within our fisheries communication plan, but a lot of the work that Kayla Howard, our fishery liaison, if you haven't met her before, I hopefully you will in the near future. And Kayla Howard has been doing an exceptional job with our fisheries communication plan development, along with leading on the ground, boots in the ground, deck plate level fisheries interaction. But we also integrate a lot of fishery representatives that we have through Rhode Island, New York, and Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And what's great about these fishery representatives that we've contracted is their primary function is to represent their specific fisheries community and their region. So these are one of the things that we kind of pointed out in some of our support, offshore support services, and that one pager that we pointed out to you all and sent out earlier. And we do have some FRs, as we call them, in Rhode Island, one of them being the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island, Fred Matera. And kind of moving forward, we do have information that we'd like to provide, and we constantly do with the fishing communities. We have flash drives, electronic charting depicting locations of all of our activities, the spacing, the layout for the New England Wind project. And then we also are very active. Part of our COP in our fisheries communications plans was to develop a gear loss program. And we have that in place at this time. It's actually a form found on all of our websites for New England Wind. And it's something that we will advance in the future to complete into the BOEM integration and the mitigation guidance that will be coming out in the fall. Any questions on this slide? Yes, Jeff?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Number 2, if you can go into more detail on what your team believes the majority of the area will remain open to commercial fishing, but primarily during the construction phase.
That's a good question. Thank you for asking. With the spacing being as large as it is, really nowhere else have we seen a 1-by-1. And with the orientation that we found for positive and safety transit lanes, we see that, at times during construction, there will be some impacts, and those will be addressed in those mitigation strategies that we have. But I can't speak too much as to what the direct and initial impacts would be, but we will have the flexibility of the space, that 1 mile, which will hopefully avoid as much of those impacts as possible. And David?
Just make sure that Jeff is satisfied with your answer.
All set, David. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to ask, you talked about here, you're reaching out to the fishing community. I just wanted to know if you are keeping some sort of a report or logs of the communications, and if that'll be available for our review.
Kayla, would you like to speak on that a bit?
Yeah, we track most of our communications through an internal system that we can certainly pull a report from to show communications with Rhode Island specific folks, if that's of interest.
And David, we have some more information later on specifically to outreach and how we're going to be tracking not only electronically, but what the efforts that we're doing currently in the past and obviously going into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other questions for this slide? Jeff, is your hand still up or would you like us to move on? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Megan, we can move to next, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kayla Howard, fisheries liaison. I will be talking about some of the pre-construction fisheries surveys that have already taken place. And as you can see listed on this slide, a significant amount of baseline fisheries data has already been collected through our work with SMAST, Dartmouth, UMass School for Marine Science and Technology. Since 2019, we've been collecting seasonal trawl data. The trawl survey gear and methods were based off of the NEMAC trawl surveys, making it compatible with efforts that are ongoing with Vineyard Wind and other developers along the East Coast. And as you can see listed here are all the various seasons of data that we already have collected. In addition, we have collected biannual drop camera survey data. Those have been ongoing since 2019, again, using SMAST drop camera system. And like the trawl survey, this survey is also compatible with data from Vineyard Wind and in addition, some wider scale studies, including scallop surveys that SMAST has been involved in for years now. Lastly listed here, this last bullet, New England Wind is participating in a regional acoustic monitoring effort of highly migratory species in collaboration with New England Aquarium, Inspire Environmental, as well as all of the Mass Rhode Island wind developers. Acoustic receiver array has been deployed across the Mass Rhode Island wind energy area, and it will remain in place until mid-December. And highly migratory species tagging effort is currently ongoing. I see some hands, so I will go with you, Julia.
Thanks. So are the trawls randomly stratified for the trawl survey?
Yes.
Okay, I was just curious because it looks like on the chart on the bottom left there, it looks like kind of the middle does not really have any trawls. Is that not trawlable habitat or?
No, that's just a coincidental image grab of one example of one season of trawls.
Okay, so there has been sampling throughout the lease area.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Yep. Kevin?
Yeah, so I know this slide covers the pre-construction surveys, and forgive me if you're getting ready to get to construction and post-construction surveys. But that being said, do you all have any plans right now or anything available indicating construction and post-construction surveys as required in the ocean stamp?
Yeah, that'll be the next slide, and Joe will be taking that one next.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Like kids and like
I'm hearing a lot of background noise if somebody maybe came off mute. But David?
Yeah, I just wanted to first, I saw Doug threw up a thing in the chat before I did. He said, will the survey data be made available to the public? And then I have a question after that.
Yes, the data that has been gone through our internal review process already is made publicly available on our websites. There are some seasons of data that haven't gone through the official final review yet, so they are not yet posted, but once those are complete, yes, they will be made publicly available.
Thanks. And
Sure.
then my question was, can you explain how the fisheries monitoring plan for Vineyard Wind 1 played into your sampling strategy here? If there's any differences between the two areas, it should be of note, or if you noted anything else to study and survey that may have differed from that plan.
Well, all of this historic data is derived from the Vineyard One process. So yes, everything is kind of derivative from Vineyard.
And I guess there's one more question here from Doug in the chat. He says, is spawning condition collected as part of your reviews?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Okay, is spawning, is Doug, you want to?
I could jump in here on this one if you guys are stealing my thunder a little bit. So let me run through the next slide and then I'll come back to that question if that's okay. Sorry for the delay on this one. So moving forward, we're still working towards developing a finalized fisheries monitoring plan based on available guidance and best practices such as those from ROSA, BOEM, and NIMS. And some of the key considerations from these documents that we are emphasizing include the use of existing survey data and methods for increased compatibility between leases and developers and regions, stakeholder engagement, focused research topics, defined hypotheses and objectives, appropriate design, and data sharing. And in addition to the fisheries monitoring plan, we're also developing a benthic habitat monitoring plan with its own set of methods and objectives that will also provide some additional monitoring of fish habitat. So to get back to that question about reproductive status, that's something that we could include. It's still under consideration. I'll give a minute for more questions to sink in. There's a lot of text on some of these slides. Oh, and I see Doug's question pop up. I'm not sure if it has been collected or not. I'd have to go back to the report on that one. Unless Kayla, you have information on that?
No, not to my knowledge.
So I guess since there's a pause, so when do we expect the fisheries monitoring plan to be ready for this project?
We're working on getting it ready as quick as possible. We have to make some internal decisions and get that moving along. I will say one of the complications that we're trying to work through that's kind of thrown a wrench in this plan is some issues with permitting of pre-construction surveys. There's been issues for all developers now trying to get exempted fishing permits to conduct these pre-construction surveys. So it's really kind of complicated what we can do in terms of effectiveness, because without the pre-construction data, a lot of these surveys aren't all that useful. So that's something we're trying to work through, and we're hoping more information comes out very soon to help us on that.
Yeah, thanks. We're aware of the exemptions issue. Thanks.
And David, I'd just like to point out, from all the developers, we're all facing kind of the same challenges, and we're working together too. And a lot of us are working with the same kind of scientific entities. So we kind of have to be in step with those kind of processes, but we're definitely working as diligently as possible.
So with that, I think Steve is up next. Oh no, I take it back. I was jumping ahead. In addition to this fisheries independent groundwork that was covered a few slides over the last couple of slides, we've also completed analysis of the economic exposure and impacts to commercial fisheries from New England Wind, and that was prepared by Dr. Dennis King. And this study is included as part of our COP. It's publicly available if you want to see it. And the study quantified exposure and discussed impacts. So the difference being here, exposure is exposed revenue, and impacts are the actual effects after considering maybe some less conservative behaviors, such as continuing to fish within the lease area or switching to somewhere nearby. And it looked at economic exposure within each of the potential cable routes during the construction period, which are the only time when vessels are expected to be excluded in safety buffers because of safety buffers within the cable corridors there and within the entire SWDA annually. In addition to potential lost landings from revenue, fishing congestion, fishing vessel transit costs, shoreside indirect and indirect impacts were also analyzed. Sorry, direct and indirect impacts were also analyzed. As you can see from the heat maps in the figure here, overall, the cable corridors in SWDA are not heavily fished compared to some of the nearby areas. And so overall, the actual impacts from New England wind are expected to be much less than the estimated exposure. So it's a pretty complicated study. So it's hard to get into specifics on this one, but if you have any questions on the general study, I'd be happy to try to answer that. Kevin?
Yeah, and forgive me, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but did you all include impacts to the recreational fisheries and charter fisheries at all?
I think the data is pretty limited on recreational fisheries. Is Jerry on the phone that can hop in on that one? I don't think they are included.
Yeah, I'm here. Kevin, no, the answer is because there's such limited data and it is so far offshore that there just wasn't enough data to work with to try to really come up with any valid estimates. Obviously there's some additional data that's being collected as ongoing, but we relied on the NOAA data and it just wasn't robust enough to have a meaningful calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Julia?
Just kind of building off the last question, has there been any discussion of additional data collection to address that data gap on the recreational side, whether that's surveying fishers directly or other methodologies?
So I know that NIMS have made an effort at this, and if you go on the NIMS website, there's actually an analysis for higher recreational fishing and party boat vessel data, and the total number of trips estimated to have happened in that over the last, I think since between 2008 2019. So there's a pretty good grasp already on what's ongoing, and it's pretty limited. I'm not sure if anybody else on our team has information about going further on this, but we do a lot of outreach that will be covered again in the next slide as well.
Okay, yeah, so the party and charter fleets do have some VTR reporting requirements and might be somewhat covered in the data that NOAA collects, but other recreational boats have really no location reporting offshore. So you might want to consider doing some directed outreach with the industry to get information about where recreational harvest is occurring in these areas.
Okay. Anybody, any comments from Kayla or John on that one?
We will address that next slide, Julia.
All right, David, you seem anxious.
Sort of. I'm always anxious. So in the bottom southwestern lease area there's a persistent dot every year, sort of right above the notch there. Do you know what's being collected there?
What's being fished for?
Yeah, what's harvested there? Because it seems persistent in all the years.
Anything I say would be a best guess, so I don't want to speculate on that one. I think
Okay.
this data, you could.
Hey, where are you seeing a red dot?
No, not red dot. It's a little tan dot, sort of where the 90-degree angle, the big 90-degree angle is, and there always seems to be something being harvested just right above there.
I can tell you, I don't have all the data in front of me, but I can tell you that the mix of catch within this area is far more diverse than it was in the northern portion where Vineyard Wind 1 was, where longfin squid is not as predominant. Obviously in this area, maybe there's a bigger mix of whiting. So there's just a bigger mix in this whole area.
Okay, thanks.
All right, is there any other questions? I saw some stuff in the chat popping up, but my screen just froze. Okay, it doesn't look like it. And I'll pass it back over to John and Kayla.
Thanks, Joe. And as we kind of get towards the end here, again, we really appreciate all the questions that you have and the input, and we'll have a much larger session and discussion period as we wrap up. But I did want to point out, as communication outreach is a very, very important part to not only connecting with the community, but listening and obviously receiving that input. And I give a lot of credit to the work that's been put forth with not only our outreach team, but with the other developers in disseminating information. Steve Tandros, that's on the line as well, as we introduced him in the beginning, and then Kayla, as you've met before, are really our large key parts and are consistent with not only our weekly and timely weekly Mariner updates, but also working with the Coast Guard and providing the valuable information that's necessary for those NOAA Mariners. I'd also like to point out, and I'll actually pass this over to Kayla. I'd also like to point out how important our monthly port hours are. And Kayla is really the lead on putting these together and has been over the years.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so actually, along with some of the other Mass Rhode Island developers, we like to gather monthly to host port hours. It's usually just an informal gathering. Actually, tomorrow morning, we will be in Point Judith. As you can see here, that's one of our normal spots that we hit every month. So we coincidentally will be down in the port tomorrow morning. So be sure to come down and see me. Everybody is welcome, fishermen, the general public, academia, we see them all. So please come down and see us anytime. We'll be there tomorrow, 9 to 12. But it's a great opportunity to, connect with people that we might not otherwise have the opportunity to connect with. Again, come with questions. We usually have some coffee and donuts and charts and information for anybody that attends. So yeah, we do that once a month. So come down and see us tomorrow.
And these port hours too, thank you, Kayla. These port hours extend all the way from New York all the way across. We've even done one over on Cape Cod, Chatham as well. But our staple ones are going to be Montauk, Stonington, Point Judith, and New Bedford. So those are monthly. And to go back to some questions asked before about how are we integrating ourselves and receiving information back, not only from the commercial fleet, but also from a recreational side, these monthly port hours, they do yield that recreational community as well. And so we're receiving input and allowing this to be really an open forum in any direction that people want to carry it. This information is also put out through our mailing list. And yes, David?
Oh, I could have waited till you finished your thought.
Okay.
No, while we're on the port hours, I just wanted to, I saw that, I think it's tomorrow, the developer of the app that I guess the developers are looking to develop, they're going to be there also. And I was just wondering if this is a one-time shot that app developer is only going to be there now, or if they're going to be there in the future too. And maybe whenever you have them, if you don't plan to do this, if you could discuss the app and how that's going also.
Absolutely. And we'll skip down to that right now as we're on that topic, but I just want to go back to the sentence I was saying before. We want the information to be disseminated as cleanly and as easily as possible. We use that through an email distribution, but then even that much more such, we're moving towards exploring those mobility platforms. If you remember, if any of you are listening to the BOEM calls for the East Coast, West Coast Gulf or developer, or even regionally, the Rhode Island one that we had, one of the recommendations in BOEM was using digital information technology platforms to bring together survey and construction schedules and locations in addition to standard local NOAA Mariners via Coast Guard. So we find this is a great opportunity. And with the waterfront application through Ithaca, we have found that this is going to be a great fit, not only for the Avangrid projects within this region, but also with the cooperation of other developers. And Kayla has been just one of the strongest catalysts on bringing waterfront to this area. Avangrid and Kayla have been working with Ithaca with the development for it. So I'll let her kind of give her spiel as I just kind of put her on the pedestal of waterfront. Well deserved.
Yeah, so I have been in talks with the folks from Waterfront for almost 2 years now, with my previous work with Vineyard on the Vineyard Wind 1 project. And to answer your question, David, no, I certainly do not think that this is your only chance to come and talk to the Waterfront folks tomorrow. They were actually down in the port of New Bedford with us this morning. They'll be down in Galilee tomorrow. But they are the ones that are attending are located in Boston. So I'm sure that if there is any specific request by anybody, they would be more than happy to accommodate. That is one of the things I can say about this group in particular, is that they're always willing to accommodate requests and get the feedback from the boots on the ground, if you will.
And I'll piggyback on that real quick. And then Jeff, I'll grab your question. We have been working on this application and this development well before the BOEM guidance had come out, the draft guidance. So I'd like to just kind of put that out there, and along with other developers, this has been in the back of our minds. And the development wasn't only from the input from the developers, fishery liaisons, but from the inputs from the FRs, the inputs from the recreational and the commercial communities. All of these drove the design and what's going to be kind of the conceptual rollout of this application in the near future. Jeff.
Okay, so John, thank you, because that kind of answered my question, one of my two questions, in that is technically savvy as the commercial fishing community is, and they are asking for information in a straightforward and simplistic format as possible, especially when they're out on the ocean. You know, simple mariner notices they want presented in a certain way rather than having to open attachment, for an example. So I'm glad you're saying that the development of this particular app is being driven by the potential user groups of that app, because that was going to be my question. Are they really going to use something that BOEM suggests you should do? The developers think it's a great idea, but we're not the ones out on the ocean, 7 days a week. The other question was, you have your monthly port hours, you're in various locations at various times, and you've been holding them for a while. And do you track data-wise who attends, how many attend? Do you post it? Is that information something that can be seen? I mean, we're holding a meeting right now and we don't have the fishermen attend. Are you holding port hours and having 1 or 2 people come, or are you getting more than that?
It very much depends on a lot of different factors, weather being probably the biggest. As you can guess, if the weather is good, the fishermen are going to be fishing. So it is very hit or miss. There are days that we talk to one person. There are others where many attend. It can be a simple question. I had a question. Who's in this area? What scout? What survey vessel did I see over the weekend when I was over here? Was that you guys? So it can vary depending on the day, on the weather. I personally do track as much information that folks are willing to share with me. If somebody just tells me, that they're in town from New Jersey and that his name is Mike, and it's obvious that he doesn't want to share more information about himself than that, I don't pry. There are other folks that are very willing to, give me their names and more information about where they fish, what vessel they're on, what they're fishing for, what gear type, all the various things. But it very much depends on the day and the person. And I do, again, try to track as much as I can personally. So I hope that answered your question.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Jeff, and for the rest of the meeting group, you know, communication and outreach from a fisheries standpoint is really multidimensional. We really look at it in what are the, you know, the multiple layers that we can actually use. When we talk about this, the simple, I say simple, but they're very important. You know, the bulletins, the offshore notice to mariners, you know, these are put out by email. We've had multiple fishermen say, I'm not on my boat and I'm not going to pull up a laptop and check my email. What can you do with this? What can you provide for information on this phone? This is what's next to me. This is what I'm communicating with when I'm underway. So we've adopted and brought on many of the ideas and soon the contracts with this mobility platform such as Waterfront. But furthermore, we expand that and we use our onboard fishery liaison program. Our scout vessels right now, we have 2 scout vessels actually being used that are based out of Point Judas. And we have the Barbara and the Mr. Marco. And then also we use those fishery representatives. I mean, all these different layers, they bring back as much information as we possibly can. So as much input as we can provide to the communities, we look to have that reciprocated as much as possible back to us, if that kind of helps answer some questions. We also, and then lastly, one of the bigger things that we like to engage with the recreational communities is we do a multitude across New England sponsorships of fishery events, programs, tournaments. Yes, David.
Oh, no, please finish your comment. I just had something after.
No, that was it.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make a statement that even though there's no fishermen here, we've heard a lot of concerns of the fishermen, and you guys have heard a lot of the concerns of the fishermen, and they go for all the different projects. So we try to represent all their concerns. So just wanted you to make sure that the project doesn't exactly stand alone, and we're wrapping all the things we've heard from the Rhode Island fishermen into our review.
And I would really ask if anyone's interested in seeing the great dynamic that we bring to these port hours when we have multiple FLs, fishery liaisons like Kayla, multiple from different developers present to hear those collective ideas, those comments, those concerns. It's really a great atmosphere. And not only do say something is addressed to Kayla, she's echoing that out to the rest of the fishery liaisons, which is then echoed throughout the rest of the developers. We understand that the fishing community really doesn't see sometimes just a singular developer, but they look at that larger regional lease area. So we're trying to address that from a fisheries standpoint and be as receptive as possible. For this slide, I don't have anything else. Christina, did you have something to add, please?
You know what, I just on this slide, before we go to the last one, it's a very small thing, but we talk about cables, offshore wind cables, bringing the power to shore. And I wanted to point out that on this photo that's on this slide right now, one of our project team members is actually holding a representative cable. So you can see approximately how big these cables are. So just to give a sense of scale in terms of what's buried underneath the seafloor out there, it's about that big. Thought that might be helpful for anyone who hadn't quite seen that yet. So.
Thank you, Christina. If there's no more questions on this slide, I think we could advance forward.
Well, thank you all. Very much appreciate that. I still encourage any more questions that we all might have right now to get them out, but please, if you'll indulge us, you're probably going to get some email follow-ups from us. We know that you have offered to get us some information during this presentation, in addition to the presentation, so we appreciate that. But I thought the discussion was good, but I don't want to stop it right now if there's more to be had. David?
Yeah, we talked to a lot of different developers. We've got a lot of activity going on. So just so we don't forget this, I just wanted to make sure to encourage you guys that we advocate that if there's any surveying activity go on, that as much separation as possible be made between any of the biological sampling, just to try and keep the disturbances to a minimum.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Thanks, David. Christina, Megan, do you have any questions of CRMC?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm not sure if we lost Megan. Maybe we lost her audio. But
Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, we
Okay,
can.
sorry.
We
Okay,
can.
good. I just resurrected.
Okay, great. Welcome back. So yeah, no, really appreciate everybody's time. We're happy that the review process has officially started today. Definitely be reaching back out with the information, and we'll probably just send it straight to CRMC and let the distribution happen as needed to anybody else who was on the line today and who might be interested.
So Christina, just to clarify, the clock will start tomorrow, and we will send you an official "the clock has started tomorrow" letter. So
great.
But we'll also reiterate some of the things in our 30-day letter, just to keep that at the top of everybody's pile, if so-called, if you will. We do have required steps in the federal consistency review process, so we will be very much in touch with you and your team over the next several months on a number of matters, not just information requests, so that we can review further and get some of our questions answered. But we're also going to look at some of the long-term issues that we see that might need some additional data that might take some time to generate on your end or to get to us on your end, and then additional time on our end to review it, which may affect the time frame of our review. So we'll probably be looking for a stay agreement on this particular project, and we'll work on that with you, obviously. So there's a lot of details yet to be fleshed out, but I think moving forward, we keep the lines of communication as we have been. We ensure that our FAB and HAB are notified every step of the way of what's going on. We will be copying them on a lot of our correspondence to you anyway, and information that you get to us will immediately be forwarded on to them so that they have the ability to look at it, input, and give us advice. So that's generally in a really high level overview how we'll be operating on this project in the next several months, if not longer.
We appreciate that. Yep, it's all it all sounds good to us, and definitely the lines of communication are open. So happy to take the next step. So we'll keep an eye out for the letter.
Great, good. So unless there are more questions, more follow-up, David, your hand's still up.
No, I have a new question. I just wanted to ask Kayla if the waterfront app has a live version now that we can look at, or if it's still under development only.
It is still under development. There are a few folks that have been selected for the beta testing phase, if you will. Fred Matera and Jay Rooney over at the CFCRI both have access, I believe. They're both beta testers, as well as myself. So if anybody is able to come down, I mean, not necessarily just tomorrow, but at really any time in the future, I'd be happy to sit down with people and show them what I have available on my phone, as well as get feedback to share with the developers on it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great.
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 Well, it looks like that's all we have for tonight. So unless there are any more questions, again, Christina, Megan, and your team, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll keep moving this project forward.
Great.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.